Okay, here is our last lesson for this unit on linear models, and we're still talking about bivariate data just like we were with scatter plots. Well, we have two different variables going on, and we want to know if there's an association with the two variables given. So a two-way frequency table just simply displays the counts of categories. So here we're looking at the categories of gifted classes. We have people that take gifted classes and those that take on level, and we're comparing to see if there's an association with taking extracurriculars or not. So you can see that we have our categories labeled going across the top. We have our columns, and then we have another set of categories going across. These are the other categories, and these are the rows. Notice we have several totals. So the totals are here and here. So you can see that this is the main total. This is how many people are surveyed. This total is how many folks take extracurriculars. 20 folks take no extracurricular. And then we have the two column totals. How many gifted students that I surveyed and how many students that I surveyed that take on-level classes. So let's get started. And again, remember to pause the video at any time so you can copy these in your notes. So here we're comparing 7th grade to 8th grade students, and we're wanting to know if there's association with being in a specific grade level, and do you get more or less hours of sleep? Or maybe there's no association at all. So the first thing we need to recall is this is called a two-way frequency table. And in each cell are the values. And we can see this table is incomplete. So we can see that we had 360 folks surveyed in all. We can see that we surveyed 180 8th graders, and we can get the 7th grade total by subtracting 180 from 360. So we also surveyed 180 7th graders. Now, how many folks that we surveyed, how many sleep between 3 and 6 hours? Well, we just subtract our total surveyed and we subtract 160, and we can see 200 people or 200 students that we surveyed get between 3 and 6 hours of sleep each night. Now let's just go ahead and fill in the rest. So this cell is 7th graders that get a good amount of sleep, so we just subtract 60 from its total. This cell represents 8th graders who get little sleep. And now we have everything filled up. So now we can answer a few questions. So we know that we had 160 folks that get a lot of sleep. We had 200 folks that get little sleep. The totals of each grade level were the same. 120 7th graders get a lot of sleep. Only 40 8th graders get a lot of sleep. We can see that 60 7th graders get a little amount of sleep, where 140 8th graders get a little amount of sleep. So you can kind of just go ahead and see that it seems like 7th graders get more sleep than 8th graders. So here is our frequency table. We're going to go through a few vocabulary terms. Here's the frequency table. Now, the cells in the middle where we actually took the survey, and I just went around and asked 360 7th graders and 8th graders and said, how many hours do you get? These inside cells, these are called the joint frequency. These are the values where the categories, our columns, and our rows join together. The outside values, the totals, are called marginal frequencies. They're in the margins. But take note that 360, the total surveyed, is not considered a marginal frequency. So a whole table relative frequency. So the word relative, you just need to think as percent. So we're going to find the percent to help maybe better answer our question. Now, when it says whole table, you're dividing every cell by the total surveyed. So we're simply going to say 120 divided by 360 times 100. So that's what we're going to be doing throughout this table. This is a whole table relative frequency. So I'm not going to write all those out, but I'm just going to take my calculator and do the math. So 120 divided by 360 and then times 100 gives me the percentage. So about 33.3. And then we have 60 divided by 360 and then times 100, and that gives us 16.7. And then this is going to give us 50%, I can already see. Because 180 out of 360, that's half. And then your total is going to be 100%. Now let's do these. So we're going to divide and then multiply by 100. So divide by your total surveyed. And this is about 1.1%. So don't forget the 100. And then we're going to have 140 divided by 360. So 140 divided by 360 times 100. And that gives us about 38.9. And we should all write percentages on here. Don't leave that off. And then we have 160 divided by 360 times 100. And this is going to give us about 44.4%. And then we have 200 divided by 360 times 100. And that gives us about 55.3, around 6%. So we can see that about 11% of 8th graders have a lot of sleep, where we compare almost 39% that we surveyed get little sleep. So we can see that more 8th graders get little sleep compared to a lot of sleep, and 7th grader is the opposite. But we still need to be a little bit more specific to answer the question, does grade level, being in a specific grade level, have any association with how much sleep you get? Or vice versa. If you get a lot of sleep, are you more or less likely to be a 7th grader or 8th grader? You can ask it either way. So here is our conditional relative frequency table by column. So we're going to take a look at the columns, and we're going to use the total of the columns here. So we don't need this information at all. So is there an association with how many hours of sleep? Do you know what grade level you would probably be in? So we're saying, does hours of sleep have any association with the grade level? So we're going to take each joint value and divide it by your marginal value. And this will be 100%. Then we're dividing this column by its total of 200. So let's do the math. 120 divided by 160 times 100 gives us 75%. And then we know that the 40 divided by 160 is going to be the 25%. Now let's do 3 to 6 hours of sleep. So 60 out of 200 people that get little sleep. This is going to be 30%. So 30% of the little amount of hours of sleep come from 7th graders, and then the other percent is going to be 70% are 8th graders. So let's look at this. if 75% of the folks who get a lot of sleep are 7th graders, we could predict and say, yes, there is an association. If you get several hours of sleep, you're more likely to be a 7th grader than an 8th grader. When the percentages have a big gap between them, there's a good amount of gap, then you can say there is an association. We could also conclude that if you get 3 to 6 hours of sleep, you're more likely to be an 8th grader because 70% of the folks that get 3 to 6 hours are 8th graders. This is conditional relative, meaning percentage, frequency by column. This means I use the marginal totals of the columns. Now let's take a look at the last one, the conditional relative frequency by row. Now I'm asking, is there an association with grade level, 2 hours of sleep? Could I make a prediction that if you're a 7th grader, you're more, less, or equally likely to have a lot of sleep or a little sleep? So we're going to use the totals of the rows. So we had 180 7th graders. We also had 180 8th graders that we served. So we surveyed equal amounts. So these are both going to be 100%. And now we're going to divide and multiply by 100. And we get about 66.7%. So what this means is 66.7% of 7th graders get a lot of sleep. And let's keep going. And 33.3 get a little amount of sleep. Now, we need to calculate our 8th graders and see if you're an 8th grader, the probability of getting a lot of sleep is about 28.5. We'll say 28.6. And then let's see what percent get a little amount of sleep. And we can say about 77 point, and because we're rounding, we are going to have a little bit of error, but that's okay. So there is an association because there's a big gap between these numbers. If you're in 7th grade, I can see that there's a big difference between the hours of sleep that you get. If you're in 7th grade, you're more likely to get a lot of sleep. If you're in 8th grade, you're more likely to get a little amount of sleep. So there is an association between being in a particular grade level and how much sleep you get. And maybe it's because in 8th grade, you have more high school courses that you're taking, and you have even a foreign language that you're taking now. So you're spending more hours of study, hopefully, and you get less sleep. I hope this helps.